significant thoughts you may want to share. And do not forget to answer the evaluation of this session. The link for evaluation and attendance will be posted at the end of the session in the Zoom chat box. So thank you for your cooperation. To begin with, let's have a moment of silence for the prayer and singing of the Philippine National Anthem.
Salamat po, o dakilang maligalang. Sa mga gabing mahimbing kami sa pagtulog sa mapayapang tanglaw ng mga tala at buwan. Salamat po sa aming bawat paggising sa umaga na sinasalubong kami ng masiglang sikat ng araw. Walang kasing sarap ang mabuhay at walang kasing saya ang makapiling ang mga mahal namin sa buhay. Kung ito man po ang bigay ninyong inspirasyon upang mapalaganap namin ang pagmamahal sa aming sarili, sa kapwa, sa kapaligiran, at sa aming bayan, tinatanggap po namin ang hamon na mag-alay naman ng paglilingkod para sa pangkalahatang kapakanan. Alam namin na ito ang wastong kapalit ng pang-araw-araw ninyong biyaya sa buong sangkatauhan. Lahat kami ay hinahayaan po ninyong dumaan sa paglalakbay ng aming mga buhay na may tungkulin namang mag-iwan ng bakas na kapaki-pakinabang sa aming bawat hakbang. Ipinalalasap din po ninyo sa amin ang masaganang biyaya ng kalikasan sa pamamagitan ng mahabagin ninyong kalooban. Naway maging katanggap-tanggap kami sa oras na kami ay hihimlay naman sa kandungan ng kalikasang binabasbasan ninyo na aming pangalagaan. Sumainyo ang luwalhati ng kataas-taasan. Kataas-taasang hinahangad naming naway maging kasing taas ng aming pag-abot sa hangarin na magkaroon ang aming bayan ng pagkakaisa, pag-unlad, at pangmatagalang kapayapaan.
Okay, once again, we welcome you to this final leg of our third part foundation of Peace Education 101 Teachers Training webinar series. Today's webinar is part of this 3 webinar series. We have the first part of this webinar last July 17 with Dr. Anonas and Director Ligoro on MSU in their very substantive and inspiring talks on peace, university, and discovering inner peace and culture of peace. And the second part was last July 24. We had a very interesting steering and lively panel discussion and sharing of their teaching approaches and pedagogies with Dr. Johara Asis and Professor Lovely Parungao and Professor Busran. So this morning, we will be listening again to talks on understanding conflict, peace, and violence, and conflict resolution from our very competent, equally competent speakers. So without further ado, let me introduce to you our first speaker for this session. Our first speaker is a university guidance counselor. She is a registered psychometrician and a guidance counselor by profession. She is a graduate of Notre Dame University with the degree of Bachelor of Science in Psychology. She obtained her master's degree in counseling psychology and PhD in peace and development in the same prestigious university where she worked as a psychometrist and guidance counselor for 16 years. She untiringly spread good vibes, not only in the local, national, but also in the international scene. Amongst her involvement include 3 decades of peace education in the Philippines, sharing stories of hope and challenges at Miriam College, Quezon City, where she served as a sharer. She also participated in the 7th International Conference on Law and Society at University of Sabah, Malaysia. She has also field exposure on Asian Studies Institute at the National University of Singapore and the 8th International Conference of Science and Technology for Sustainable Development in People's Republic of China, where she was awarded as the best presenter, to name a few. She served as a resource person in various seminars or workshops like conflict management, counseling or marriage counseling, gender and development, leadership, mental health, norm and test construction, parenting, peace and development, psychological first aid, stress management, and values. She is also the vice president of the PGCA Region 7 and an evaluator of CHED Region 7's quality assessment team. She is at present an associate professor of the Social Sciences Department and of the Graduate School of Mindanao State University, Maguindanao, where she formerly served as the university counselor and the director of the Institute of Peace and Development in Mindanao, where she implemented outreach programs and projects relating to mental health and peace building. She manages a psychological testing and wellness center in Cotabato City, aiming to provide worthwhile listening self or counseling service to those facing behavioral, physical, or mental health challenges. A psychometrician, guidance counselor, and a proud mother of 5. Ladies and gentlemen, let's give our virtual floor to Professor Margie P. Dailusan Fiesta.
Thank you so much, Ma'am Sandra. By the way, I am the PGCA Vice President of Region 12. And just once, the director of IPDM, now the director of IPDM of MSU Maguindanao is Professor Grant Warren Lu. Hello, Sir Warren. Yeah, good morning, colleagues in the pursuit of peace. My courtesy to the chancellors of all campuses, especially to our very own Chancellor, Dr. Bayajira Limbona, the Chancellor of Mindanao State University, Maguindanao. Oo, parang kinakabahan ba? Oo. Yeah, understanding peace, conflict, and violence. You know, peace education in the Philippines is more than 3 decades now. And I'm proud to tell that I am one of the pioneering students in peace education because peace education started in the Philippines. Of course, no, right here in Cotabato City at Notre Dame University, where once I was so young and full of dreams. Yo, yes, more than 3 decades, meaning more than 30 years in quest for peace. Pero bakit hanggang ngayon may conflict pa rin? May violence pa rin? Do we understand really why there is still ongoing conflict and violence? Bakit kaya? Bakit kaya, Prince? I would like to hear Prince. Hello, Prince. Nandiyan ka ba? Sino ang nandito? Hi, Sir Bong. Grabe, no? Oh, kakaupo talaga. Sir Bong, bakit kaya may conflict pa rin hanggang ngayon? Bakit may violence pa rin hanggang ngayon? Ano sa palagay mo?
Hello, good morning. Bakit may violence
Yes,
hanggang ngayon?
yes. Bakit may conflict
Ah,
pa rin?
feel ko kasi ang conflict ay kakambal ng tao. Hanggat tayo nabubuhay, talagang may conflict kasi kumbaga it's part of the human na nagka-clash yung ating mga ideas to the point na yun nga, nagkakaroon ng violence because hindi na makontrol yung ating mga emotions. Siguro, most probably because also of the culture of our experiences. Mga ganun po.
Okay, so balikan natin mamaya, sir. Sagot natin ha, dahil parang part na ito siya ng human being because at times we cannot control our emotions. Sige. One more. I wanted to hear from, talagang, kasi ang mga pangalan Arnan. Kailan core team si Arnan? O sige nga. Oo. Okay lang ba, Arnan? Sige. Now, when Dr. Jawar told me that this is my topic for today, the first thing that came to my mind was, how would I present this topic in a way that they find something new in it? Although I understand that there are faculty members here who have no intensive training on peace, I believe they have good understanding of the topics. No, for they have read, no, for sure, FPE 101 manual. And what should I give you? Para naman parang, ano ba yung maiba naman na maibigay ko sa inyo? Don't you know that there is psychology of peace? Remember, I must say, yeah, there is psychology of peace. So this is the thing that I will share to you, hoping that at the end of the session, one would be able to understand conflict and violence in the perspective of psychology of peace. Now, again, don't you know that over 80% of all humanitarian crises are the result of conflict? It is, alam natin, no, it is an intrinsic and inevitable aspect of social change. Parang kakambal na talaga yan, sabi nga ni Sir Bong. But how we deal with the conflict determines the impacts and outcomes of change. Ano nga ba talaga ang conflict? Eto. So, alam naman natin, alam ko familiar tayo ng mga definitions ng conflict. So, sige, a backgrounder lang. So, conflict, from a Latin, to clash or engage in fight. Nakashare na, okay na siya. Nakikita niyo na ang, okay. Now, it occurs when two or more individuals or groups pursue mutually incompatible goals. So, mamaya, medyo i-elaborate natin yan. Okay. Now, understanding how conflict can be managed, utilized, transformed, help promote more peaceful resolutions and responses. So, ayan siya. So, what is peace and how it is how it is accomplished? Paano ba talaga siya, no? Ma-attain kasi nga sabi natin more than 30 years na tayo in quest for peace. Pero ito, conflict happens, no, in these three contexts. Pwedeng personal, family, alam natin yan, school, and community levels to the international level. So if we notice, it starts from personal, then biglang to the family, to school, and community levels. All right. Ito, medyo backgrounder ulit. We understand peace. We define peace in this context also. We have to understand first that there are three types of violence because actually there are a lot of definitions of peace. Each of us has his own definition of peace. And the way we define peace is dependent on our experience. On our experience with our environment, at home, in the community, in the school. So that's how we define peace. But generally, when we say peace, this is the more of the negative peace. Alam natin yan, yung definition ni John Galton, no? May negative peace and positive peace. Free from direct violence, free from indirect violence. And these violences are in three types: the direct, structural, and cultural violence. Pag sinabi natin direct violence, alam natin yan refers to physical acts, no, direct, no, physical acts of violence from the other person to the other person, no, from this group directly to the other group. Structural violence built into the very social, political, and economic systems that govern societies, states, and the world. No, parang yung structural violence, parang iceberg lang daw siya. That 90% is hidden from the view. We can only see the 10%. Ibig sabihin, parang nakaugat na. No? Kung sabi ni Sir, parang kakambal na ng tao yung conflict. Kasi nga, bago magkaroon ng violence, it starts muna with the conflict. No? Ano naman itong cultural violence? Those aspects of culture that legitimize violence and make violence seem like an acceptable means of responding to conflict. So, may background na tayo ng konti. No? So ano ba talaga itong psychology of peace? In the beginning of the 20th century, etong si William James published his classic essay on the moral equivalent of war. So war, aggression, and violence has ever since been accompanied by studies of peacemaking, kindness, and non-violence. So, syempre, kakambal talaga niyan. Dahil nga may mga war aggressions, kaya nga nandito tayo ngayon. No? Kaya nga mayroong FPE 101. Okay? What causes violence and what can be done to counter it? No, since violence causes its destructions in school and nations, an understanding of what makes the human mind inclined to such behavior is crucial. Kaya, psychology of peace. Sige tayo hanap ng resolutions, ng solutions, pero bakit hanggang ngayon, andito pa rin? So, sabi nga, if war begins in the minds of the people, then it should be in the minds of the people na kung saan ito ay mahahanapan din ng solution. No? So, what causes violence? What can be done to counter it? Now, there are 4 themes in complementary themes, but I chose only the first theme, the psychological cause of violence. Ano ba yung psychological cause ng violence? Violence is defined as injurious activity that is done directly or socially or inflicted by social institutions in the form of poverty or pollution. Now, there are many ideas to this. Some are well accepted and understanding to the intricacy of the problem. Actually, none is expected to be the entire cause of violence without taking account others into account. Now, these ideas are in categories, no? Psychological cause of violence. Ano yung mga categories na ito? Disconnect. May mga disconnections daw tayo. Una dito is this moral disengagement. It's Bandura, and this, alam naman natin si Bandura, no, na psychologist din siya. Bandura and his colleagues argue that most inhumane behavior comes from psychological processes by which original ideas of moral conduct are disengaged. Balikan natin. Most inhumane behavior comes from psychological processes by which original ideas of moral conduct are disengaged. Diba, we believe that the person sa philosophy, no, person is morally good. Talaga, no, talagang nang pinanganak siya, ang tao talagang mabait, no, morally right. So ito, in the process of disconnection, my moral disengagements, these mechanisms daw are remove inhibitions, has been extensively documented in historical atrocities. Siyempre may mga pag-aaral na ginawa dito na may mga moral disengagement. So paano daw siya i-disengage? Change how you think about it. Okay. The cognitive transformation of the reprehensible conduct into good conduct. Kasi may mga human tendencies tayo. Pag hindi kasi natin na-process, sabi ni Sir Bong kanina, yung mga emotions natin, the tendency for us is to give in to that tendency. So we need to transform that into good conduct. Another, the distancing. To continue violence, one can create mental distance from reality of what is happening. Isolation form the behavior, a mental barrier. Now, violence daw is often made easier when the distancing is done physically. Kunyari yung paghulog ng bomba. No? So parang it's just easy, no, for them to drop a bomb from the airplanes. Alam nating violence yan. Kasi nga, dinidistance nila, no, yung sarili nila from that. Kasi nga, part siya ng moral disengagement. Okay? No. Another, yan. Meron din tayo dyan, no, parang another variant on distancing is tong doubling. People in extreme situations create two identities. One that does the killing and other a good family man. No? Meron pa dito, compartmentalizing. Ito siya, people put different parts of their lives into different compartments and sealed off from one another. Kunyari, the commanding officer ordering a massacre may still go to church on Sunday or still pray 5 times a day. So, kino-compartmentalize niya, nagkaroon siya ng double identity, o doubling, compartmentalizing, na ito yung personality ko, the other side of my personality, and the other side of my personality, the good in me and the bad in me. No? They are not actually thinking of their actions when they make those statements. Another related idea to this is intellectualizing. Common ito siya sa mga educated people. No? So they involve a focus on reasoning that allows violence with a firm avoidance of the accompanying negative emotions. So they have to appear that strong, no, parang manhid. Okay? Kasi hindi pwedeng, kung sa atin pa walang personalan, trabaho lang. So they try to avoid having that negative emotions while doing that act. Another one, inspired from the classical concept of operant conditioning, itong si Dave Grossman proposes another psychological mechanism allowing for a disconnection from a situation. This is a behavior modification technique. It is a procedure of stimulus response training, giving a person the skill to act under conditions. He argues that human mind throughout history has a strong resistance to killing. Okay. For example, firing would would increase if a nearby commander commanding not to fire it. But when left to their own devices, the great majority of the individual combatants appeared to avoid killing. Diba meron yung sa military na obey first before you complain. Ganon. But, in reality, kung walang nagko-command, hindi yan sila babaril. Di ba may joke pa nga dito sa amin, sa Maguindanao, no? Ang joke pa nila, alam mo ma'am, pag walang giyera, ang mga sundalo at ang mga rebelde, naglalaro ng basketball yan. There is truth in that because during foundation days ng MSU Maguindanao, meron tayong friendship game between military and group of BIFF, MILF, ganon. So kung the real thought in that is talagang man is basically good. Kung walang nagko-command for a conflict, no, for a war, at na magbabarilan, so I don't think so, no, na magkaroon ng exchange of fires, okay, ng armed conflict. Because when left to their own lang, majority of the individual combatants would really avoid killing. Now, this conditioning also influences behavior when people are frightened. For example, yung terrified children, they have to respond properly during a fire, di ba? Kahit tayo din, no? Pag may sunog, for example, is talagang escape ka agad, no? Takbo ka agad. O kahit anong drill nga, for example, in earthquake, o sabi magtago sa ilalim ng mesa, pero pag nandyan na ang lindol, ang tendency talaga ng tao tumakbo, no, run for their lives. Nawala na yung mga training on earthquake drills na yan. Okay? But what worries much with Dave Grossman is the current violent video games, because for him, this is a murder stimulation training devices. Unconsciously, etong mga laro na ito, alam naman natin kung ano yung mga laro ng mga kabataan ngayon. Unconsciously, nagre-register yan sa subconscious mind ng mga bata. Kaya, when threat comes, yung instinct nila, no, to do something against the other person, yun, lalabas, no, from the subconscious mind, no, defensive kaagad, and they do something na alam nating hindi maging maganda yung kalalabasan niya. Okay? So, another one, not aside from operant conditioning, are the beliefs. What people believe about situations affects their behavior. Though hindi naman lahat. But the beliefs do some impacts, no? For example, yung mga ideologies, a coherent belief system that has reasoned that violence is necessary to attain important goals, more likely to commit violence or join or support others in doing so. Paniniwala nila. So, kailangang magkaroon ng violence in order to attain goals. One of these is the just world view belief. This is a psychological mechanism that helps to maintain the status quo even if the situation is clearly unjust. In structural violence, for example, there can be belief that people are enmeshed in poverty. They are responsible kung bakit still mahirap sila. Because, katamaran daw. No? Ano ba yung parati nating naririnig? Ay nako, walang mahirap sa taong masipag. No? Kaya sila mahirap dahil tamad sila. Yun yung ating kalimitang naririnig. Okay? Sana matuto silang mag-save para hindi naman sila maghirap. But, don't you know that we might just be ignoring the fact that they are in a poverty situation dahil paano nga naman sila makakasave kung ang kita nila for the day is just enough to buy for bigas. No? It's just enough to meet their basic needs. Okay? Yun lang. We know naman that poverty is a picture of a structural violence. Another belief, the real politic. Ano daw yan siya? Politics, okay? Belief that politics deals entirely with the real goal, maximizing power. Ayun. Security is tied to the ability to use coercive power. And we know that each country is expected to want to achieve as much coercive power as it can. Kaya mas malaki ang budget sa military. Alright. Kaya nga, no, nagbi-build up tayo ng mga, build up of military is the safest course for us to have really security. Yun yung ating belief. Another belief is this machismo. A belief that man behave in a manly way. So, dapat muscle. No? Ang masabi natin na ang tunay na lalaki yung may muscle. Ang tunay na lalaki is intolerant of being insulted. Okay? Now, for example, in training, paano yung ating mga kabataan? No? How boys are turned into man. Yung C80 natin, di ba? First year college pa lang, no? May C80 na. So, they have to undergo rigorous training. Hala, gapang dito, gapang doon. No? So, talagang they are turning these boys into a man. Okay? Another belief, tulad ng sinabi ni Sir Bong kanina, violence is inevitable. We have this human nature killer instinct. Wow, ganun talaga? So sinasabi pa ng violence is in our genes. We have instinct for that. And that this is our nature. Now, then the expectation of violence can become a self-fulfilling prophecy. Dahil nga ito yung paniniwala natin, no? Naku, nasa genes na yata natin. Actually, hindi lang killing, no? Nasa genes. Ang sabi pa ng joke ngayon, you know, ma'am, ang corruption, nasa genes na rin. Anyway, ang corruption nasa genes na rin. Another belief that violence as a last resort. Many believe that violence should be avoided. So alam natin yan, di ba? Paniwala natin na dapat it should be avoided under ordinary circumstances and needed only as a last resort. Actually, this is the view of the just war doctrine. No? Yun. Ano pa daw? However, since it is viewed as it is, the model in the people's mind may be that it is effective in solving problems. It can be used when the situation is extreme. Pag di na jud matabang, then this is the option. However, if it is not an option at all, and if other options are laid out, baka hindi na makonsider yan. But since it is believed to be, then it is selected, not for its usefulness, o sabi nga dyan, not for its usefulness as a problem solver, but because the time for a last resort has arrived. We have no choice but to resort in this last option. Actually, nang option, no? Ito na talaga. Violence na ang kailangan. No? Giyera na talaga ang kailangan. Okay? So, yun na ngayon ang problema no? Parang hindi na ito selected but rather, sige, dumating na ang panahon na kailangan ng gawin natin because we have no choice at all. We have to use the last resort. No? And this is violence. So, di ba sabi natin kanina, there are 4, no? Number 2, the power of the situation. So, ano yung situation na yon? Destructive obedience to authority. Yeah, we know that the nature of authority causes the behavior not a desire to commit violence. Again, the nature of authority causes the behavior. We do as we are told, right? So in lines of the we do as we are told. People share the expectation that one gets to prescribe behavior for the other. The power comes not from personal characteristics, but from the position in the social structure. Ba? So kung himay-himayin natin, yun na nga, sabi ko na-mention ko kanina, pag sa mga training, no, ng military, and even kahit sa CAT natin noon, if you can still remember, obey first before you complain. Destructive obedience to authority. It is the nature of authority causes the behavior, not really the person's desire to commit violence, but we have no choice but to follow the order. Okay? Next is the technology. The technologies of violence, the weapons and the bureaucracy that mobilizes people increases the impact. The state of mind necessary to create destructive technologies can also be linked to their eventual use. So, ang talino ng tao, ginamit ang talino ng tao to develop technologies. Na bakit hanggang ngayon, no? Mga landmines, ano pa, sa isang push lang, sasabog na, no? Yung mga missiles. So lahat na ng klase ng technologies that are thought of, yan, just trying to create destructive technologies. That balang araw, if we have to use the last resort, then we have technologies to use. Ha? Ganun lang yan. Okay, number 3. This is I believe, the interesting one. Bakit nakakaroon ng violence? Ano talaga yung psychology of violence? Personality, lifelong personality traits. May idea na ba kayo kung anong personality type meron kayo? Sir Bong? Sir Bong, sorry ha, kasi ikaw yung nakikita ko eh. Gusto ko kasi yung may kausap ako. Kaya mas masarap talaga magbigay ng training, no? Pag face-to-face. Ma'am Sandra, ikaw din. Kasi ikaw yung gumagalaw dyan. Oo. Sir Bong, do you have any idea what type of personality do you have? Ibalik ko nga muna ito para wala kayong idea. Naku. Have you taken personality test, Ma'am Sandra? Wala kang ligtas.
Yes, ma'am, but I forgot what my personality test result was.
Wow. Sige ha. Tingnan natin kung how significant is understanding of one's personality, okay, in their roles in the conflict and in violence. Eto, meron tayong tinatawag, syempre, alam kong familiar kayo dyan, the authoritarian personality. Ito yung mga traits nila. Rigid, unthinking, adherence to conventional ideas of right and wrong. Di ba, expression natin, no, ikaw talaga, authoritarian ka talaga. Kaya nga meron tayo yung, di ba sa parenting, no, merong authoritarian, democratic, laissez-faire, or yan. Di ba? Authoritative, so meron yan. So alam natin iba naman yung authoritarian sa authoritative. Na ito mga authoritarian personalities, mga rigid do ito sila. Pag ito lang, no? Unthinking adherence to conventional ideas of right and wrong. So bahala kayo, basta ito yung alam ko, ito yung dapat. Respect for and submission to authority, a desire for a strong leader with followers revering the leader. So kailangan sundin ako, no? My word is my command. And eto, take anger out on someone else. Since the unquestioning follower cannot express anger toward the authority, it is stored up. and displaced to an outside who is different. No, naghahanap ng scapegoat. Yeah. No? Or pwedeng displacement na tinatawag. Dahil cannot say no or dahil ang inis niya sa leader, ikimkimin na lang niya na pagbukas ng gate, nakita ang aso, sinipa ang aso. No? So, yung kanyang anger is na-displace. Kaya huwag kayong haharang-harang. Pag nakita na ninyo ang inyong, alam nyo na, ang yung mga significant others na medyo galit, tumabi-tabi na. No? Baka kayo mga scapegoats doon. Yan yung mga authoritarian. Okay? They cannot trust people. Okay? A negative view of people means harsh law requiring a strong force or army. Siyempre, ako lang talaga yung tama, so they cannot trust people. Oversimplified thinking. Now, when authority tells us what to do or what the single source of our problem is, we do not have to take the responsibility for our own thinking. So, wala jud. No? And they have to guard against new ideas dahil ideas are already set. New ones are threatening. So, ito yung mga authoritarian personalities. Medyo hindi yan sila open to innovations, no, to innovative ideas. They are not open to change. May mga naalala na ba ng mga kasama? Na medyo ganon. Sige, nakakapag-isip. Ito, the Machiavellian personality. Ito, this is a psychology that refers to personality trait which sees a person so focused on their own interest. They will manipulate, deceive, and exploit others to achieve their goals. Machiavellianism is one of the traits in what is called the dark triad. The other two being narcissism and psychopath. So, dark triad na yan siya. Yung Machiavellism. Machiavellianism. Okay. Ano naman yan sila? Siyempre, ang author niyan si Niccolo Machiavelli in the 16th century, the political philosopher. Actually, may test ito siya. A range of from being to from submissive into manipulative, no, from being manipulative or submissive. Ganun lang yan. Pag high ka, syempre mas mataas yung manipulation tendencies mo, at pag mababa, syempre mababa din, no? O pag mataas, depende yan sa score, no? Kasi may mga scales yan siya. Hindi na tayo mag-dwell dyan. Now, ito naman yung mga traits nila. For Machiavellian personality, ito yung laro nila. Never tell anyone the reason you did something unless it is useful to do so. So medyo pa-humble effect, no? Ito pa, the best way to handle people is to tell them what they want to hear. Do you have tendency for that? Kaya, when we give feedback to the other person, you have to be careful because full of defenses ang tao. If they are not yet ready to accept criticism or feedback, ayun, maging defensive sila because Machiavellian belief that people wanted to hear only what they want to hear. Are you open to feedback, to criticisms? No? So, ganun yun siya. Yun yung psychology ng Machiavellian. Another, generally speaking, people will not work hard unless they are forced to do so. Ganun ba? Mag-isip-isip tayo. Anyone who completely trusts anyone else is asking for trouble. Naku, ano daw yan? Anyone who completely trusts anyone else is asking for trouble. Mag-reflect na tayo dyan. Bakit? And it is safest to assume that all people have a vicious streak and it will come out when they are given a chance. Naku, tendency pala talaga ng tao na yan. So, medyo hilom-hilom lang sa, no? But if given a chance, naku. Ito pa palang paniniwala, it is important to, it is important pa daw to flatter people. No? Important people. It is important to flatter important people. Ano pa sip-sip? Ganun ba? Ang Machiavellian personality yan. No? It is hard to get ahead without cutting corners here and there. So parang, sabi nga hindi ganun kadali abutin yung ating mga goals. No? Another one, most people forget more easily the path of their parent than the loss of their property. The death rather. No? It is easily daw to forget the death of the parent than the loss of their property. Hindi naman siguro totoo sa lahat, no? Ito pa. One should, ito pa no, the biggest difference between most criminals and other people is that criminals are stupid enough to get caught. Nako, yan lang daw ang pinagkaiba. Ano kaya yun? So very thought-provoking, no? Itong sinasabi ni Machiavellian psychology na ito. Okay. Ano pa? Ito, one should take action only when sure it is morally right. Because most people are basically good and kind. Honesty is the best policy in all cases. Di ba ano natin yan, saying natin yan, no? Dapat ito yung ating maging guiding principle taga, lalo na ng mga leaders. Kahit tayo din. There is no excuse for lying to someone else. Grabe. Sana masunod talaga natin lahat ito. All in all, it is better to be humble and honest than important and dishonest. When you ask someone to do something for you, it is best to give the real reasons for wanting it rather than giving reasons that might carry more weight. So, ang daming reasons. When you ask someone to do something for you, it is best to give the real reasons for wanting it. Bakit? Gusto mo yan? Nagawin nila yan para sa iyo? Rather than giving reasons that might give. So, ang dami pa nating rason. No? Yan. Most people who get ahead in the world lead clean, moral lives. Wow. So most people who get ahead in the world lead clean, moral lives. And most people are brave. At tapang man talaga tayo. And it is possible to be good in all respects. And ito, Barnum was very wrong when he said, there's a sucker born every minute. Wow, ang sakit naman. Agree or disagree? Oh, so wrong daw si Barnum for that. Ito pa ang personality. So we are done with authoritarian and Machiavellian personality. Ito, ano pa pala pinakaiba ng dalawa? So the authoritarian more likely to provide political support for a dictator or violent social policies. The Machiavellian, on one hand, is more likely to supply technical support to a dictator by selling weapons, di ba? Balikan natin kung yung characteristics na Machiavellian, gagawin ang lahat. Ma-manipulate lang, ma-reach lang yung kanyang hinahangad. So ito, kailangan niyang mag-supply ng technical support to a dictator by selling weapons. Violent social policies are supported when the Machiavellian profit from them. Okay. Now, in cases of both personality type, it makes more sense to refer to people being on a continuum rather than in strict categories. So dapat yung continuum, no? Hindi yung eto ka lang at ito siya. So dapat from here to there na in the process alam natin kung anong dapat baguhin, no? Kung ano yung dapat i-change natin. Okay? So we are done, no, with authoritarian and Machiavellian. Let's go into this type of personality. So narinig naman natin, di ba? May mga expressions, narcissistic ka talaga. Narcissistic and antisocial personalities. Ano yung mga traits nila? Extreme self-centeredness and excessively conceited. They can contribute to violent acts in at least 3 ways. An associated lack of empathy. Wala. Parang walang ka-feeling, no? Bahala ka kung ano ang nangyari sa iyo. Bahala na kung ano mangyari sa inyo. Because it's me, I, me, and myself only. So yan yung mga narcissistic personalities. So they lack empathy and compassion. 2, acts of violence will have a grandeur consequences than is realistic. Wow, yung acts of violence, di ba, yung feeling nila of grandeur, yun. So they feel satisfied. Pag medyo na-attain na nila, no, yung gusto nilang gawin. Violence of that. Grandiosity which can allow the person to play God, deciding certain goals are worthy of violence and whose lives are expandable. So, ganun siya. Bakit sila ganyan? Bakit? Don't you know that these people have suffered horrific abuses? Ito yung mga sinasabi natin, mga psychopath, mga sociopath. So, sabi nga nila si Adolf Hitler daw gano'n, no? Describe as those. Bakit din? Because constant barrage of stress hormones results, ito na yung nangyayari. The system become exhausted and the emotions go flat. Missing are the racing heart and the emotions, the adrenaline rush, the perspiration that the rest of us have under stress. So, pag stress tayo, ito yung nangyayari. Ito yung mga nararamdaman natin. Dahil nga sa sobrang release, no, ng hormones, ito na yung nangyayari. No? System becomes exhausted and the emotions go flat. Now, one of the most consistent findings in sadist cold-blooded killers, meron daw silang emotional numbing extreme. So yan yung mga narcissistics. All right. The fourth, okay, the passion of war. The appeal of war. Itong si William James, a pioneer of peace psychology, in his essay, The Moral Equivalent of War, he suggested that war has appeal in meeting certain psychological functions, particularly to belong to a group. Bakit? Kaya nga, itong issue on violent extremism, bakit nagjo-join? Yung mga push, isa sa mga push factors do dyan is, they wanted to belong to a group. No? Kaya, ayun, meeting certain psychological functions. Bakit na-belong into yung mga gangsterism? Bakit nagpapamember ng gangs? Dahil wanted, to belong to a group. Okay. So, he suggested that to get rid of the scourge of war, society must offer non-violent alternatives that meet those psychological needs. So, dapat meron daw tayong non-violent alternatives because there are needs that make war attractive. So, ito yung mga needs na nami-meet if they join in a group, in an organization, to go into war. Bakit? Ito yung mga nami-meet daw nila. Pride in oneself by belonging to a greater, helping achieve its needs. So pride in oneself by belonging to a greater group, helping achieve its ends. Okay? So, ano ba yung end ng grupong yan? Alam naman natin no yung istorya ng pinapaglaban no yung right to self-determination. So ang daming na-join, maybe we do not know that one maybe of the reasons no in joining in a group is because wanting to be part of the group in achieving its needs. And nandito na tayo ngayon no. So we have the new form of government na dito sa atin. Okay? Then another need that is met is giving a sense of aliveness as part of the vast undertaking. Feeling alive. Giving meaning and purpose to an otherwise boring life. Again, joining in gangs and other groups. And displacing aggression also to a third party. Ito pa pala, no, projection of self-doubts or self-hatred onto someone else, redirecting anxieties toward a more comfortable target. So again, no, yung scapegoats, yung displacements, yung projections ng kanilang mga piled up emotions, no, ng mga sentiments nila. Kumbaga pa they have now a venue na kung saan may expression siya. So, nandoon na po project yun. So, redirecting anxieties toward a more comfortable target. Kaya yun. Okay. Then, displacing aggression onto a third party because group cohesion improves when faced with an external threat. Diba? Pag, ito pa, arguments internal to a group ceases when everyone faces a common enemy. I remember that ASAP, no, SAP 44, diba? Because I've seen the documentary for this. When the SAP 44 were in the area, kasi nga diba, alam natin na parang wala daw coordination, no? Ganun yung mga claims ng ating side, no? Na wala daw coordination. So hindi nila alam. Kaya when the group of MILF and the BIFF, no, narinig nila siyempre na may putukan, no, siyempre yung ating SAF against yung target, edi siyempre they come to our rescue. Diba? So kaya ang dami-daming pumasok na ng mga grupo. Kaya yun, nagkaroon tayo ng fallen, no, the fallen 44. Yun na siya. Kasi nga group cohesion improves when faced with an external threat. So, siyempre, akala man ng mga grupong ito, no, ng mga BIFF, MILFF, is sila yung target. So, external threat yun sila. So, whatever our internal arguments they have, it ceases when the both faced common enemy. So, for them, they perceive na yung narinig nilang putok is an enemy, no? So, dalawa. So, ito siya. Group cohesion improves when faced with an external threat. So, nag-isa sila. Okay? Ayan. Now, do we understand now why peace seems so elusive? Because, sabi nga ni Sir Bong kanina, we are living in a world with people of differing background and experiences, from the time of conception to childhood to early adulthood, that shape their perception of the situation or of the events around them. Now, these perceptions prompted them to act or to react either peacefully or violently. Okay? Now, when do you think peace be achieved? This is the reason why I chose this topic, Because we have to understand first the personalities of each one. We have to understand first why people engage in this, because we know that the state actors, di ba? The state actors, the non-state actors are people, are individuals, are individual personalities. And these state actors and non-state actors may have this kind of personalities. Malay mo, isa sa kanila dyan is authoritarian. Isa sa kanila dyan is narcissistic. No? And Machiavellian type of personality. And now that explains why. Bakit hanggang ngayon may armed conflict, may conflict that led to violence. Kahit tayo, di ba? Tayo mismo, may conflict within us. May intra-psychic conflict within us. Kung balikan natin yung ating psychology, the id, ego, and superego. Diba? Pag gusto ni id, ayoko ngang mag-attend ng webinar ngayon kasi it's Saturday. Sunday tomorrow is non-movement Sunday. Maglaag sa ako ron. Pero sinasabi ng ego, sige, no? Tama yan. Sabihin pala ni ego, sige, go. No? Kung gagawin mo yan, mamimiss mo yung topic, sayang. Pwede mo siyang magamit sa klase mo, wala ka pa namang enough background, no? Training, bago pa, you are a new teacher, no? Handling the FPE101. So, if you go on, no? If you go with your barkada, so you will miss the topics. And then the superego says, no, hindi ka talaga dapat kasi sayang, nag-effort pa naman ang core team, no, for this. Makonsensya ka naman. So you see, within us, there is already conflict, no? So ano na lang yung mga state actors and non-state actors? Diba? Aside from the intra-psychic conflict, no, ito pa yung mga differing type of personalities. So hanggat hindi ma-process at hindi nila maintindihan yung kanilang personalities at hindi nila alam kung ano yung direction nila, 'di ba? At if they are not aware of what values they would choose and they would live up to, because we know there are no right or wrong values. We cannot say that, oy Sandra, that's a wrong value. No, it's only you, Sandra, who can say that it is a wrong value. Ganun din, no? So, ang wish ko nga sana itong ating mga leaders, itong ating mga, alam mo na, no, yung mga state actors, non-state actors, kapang-kapa nila yung personalities nila, because you cannot give what you do not have. If you do not know yourself, you do not understand yourself, you cannot understand others. How can you understand the peacefulness of others when you yourself cannot understand your own peacefulness too, because you are full of stress? Ang dami mong ang hang up sa buhay, ang dami mong insecurities sa buhay, and these insecurities prompted you to join an organization. Dahil ang dami mga hang-ups, kailangang i-project at ito na, nagkaroon na ng conflict. Okay? So, kaya ito yung topic na pinili ko. Remember guys, violence is the problem, not the solution. Violence is the last refuge of the incompetent. Aray ko po. So if you resort to violence, wow, mahiya ka naman, meaning you are an incompetent person. All conflict we experience in the world is a conflict within our own selves. All right. All conflict we experience in the world is a conflict within ourselves. We need to heal first ourselves, because peace begins from within. If you are not peaceful inside, the world you see will be chaotic. Ganun lang yan. You can change what's going on around you until you start changing what's going on within you. Inner peace begins the moment you choose not to allow another person or event to control your emotions. Ulit, inner peace begins the moment you choose not to allow another person or event to control your emotions. Be founded with your emotions. Be founded with yourself. Ayun lang po. Because if you are not founded with yourself, nako, ang dali mong madala. You are vulnerable to to the invitations of the influential people kasi ang galing nila yan mag-influence, no. May mga convincing power yan sila no, to pull you to join with them. So do not allow, okay, another person or event to control your emotions. Peace comes from within. Do not seek it without, according kay Buddha. So, ang challenge ko sa bawat isa sa atin is, we are working for peace. We are advocates of peace now. The question is, are we peaceful inside? Because peace comes from within. Do not seek it without. Because if you are not peaceful inside, how can we promote peace? Diba? Kung ikaw mismo may issue ka sa sarili mo, paano ka ngayon maka-advocate sa iba? Diba? So dapat kilalanin ang sarili. Because even at this age of mine, I'm 52-year-old, still I am in the process of really affirming and reaffirming my personhood. Because it takes really effort, no, to know yourself and be grounded on yourself. And it takes really process of self-introspection. So siguro itong mga leaders, no, na mga gumagawa ng violence, na nagli-lead ng violence, baka wala siguro silang time, no, for self-introspection. So you see what psychology can do to peace. Very interesting. Guys, world peace begins with inner peace. For Dalai Lama, di ba? Di ba ang four components of peace: harmony with the self, harmony with others, harmony with nature, and harmony with God. O, nandyan yan sa ating module. Pag wala itong isa, wala talagang peace, no? So dapat meron tayong harmony with the self, and that's inner peace. Okay? So, that's it. I would like to spend more time sa mga tanong ninyo kasi mas maganda yung kasi yung sa mga tanong no, kasi malay mo may mga gustong malaman na wala dito sa presentation. So, ganun lang po. So, that's it. Guys, thank you.
Okay, so thank you, Professor Margie Fiesta, for that mentally stimulating, very substantive, and practical talk on understanding conflict, peace, and violence. So I love the concept that she introduced to us on the psychology of peace. And it is true that everything is conceived first in the mind. Even war and conflict begins in the mind. So it must be the mind first that must be healed. And another is her concept on understanding personality and, of course, its role to resolve conflicts. And although we said earlier that conflict may be inevitable, but on the other hand, psychologists still believe that man is naturally good. So we just need to be understood and be healed. And I'd like to read a comment from our participant here from, I think this is her answer to the previous question of Ma'am Margie. From Luz Dose, she said, there is still conflict until now because The internal issues are not addressed. Openness to experience, consciousness, extroversion, agreeableness, and neuroticism. Okay. So again, that's like what Mom Marty said, no? We can only achieve inner peace if we do not allow events or other people to control our emotions. So we would like to encourage our participants, if you have some thoughts about the topic, or if you have questions from Mom Marty, please reserve it after the second speakers, and write or send them on the chat box here in Zoom or Facebook comments.
Hello, hi, San. I
Yes,
would like
ma'am.
to say, hello, Ma'am Rufa. I failed to greet and say hello to Ma'am Rufa kanina. The person that I looked up to and still looking up to. She was the dean, no, when I first entered at Notre Dame University. Hello, Ma'am Ruf.
Hello.
Galing-galing
Morning.
kasi Ma'am Rufa. Hello, Ma'am Bobette, and to everyone.
Hello, Mix Marge. Good morning. Ma'am Ruth.
Oy,
Good morning.
good
To
morning.
everyone. Good
Oo.
morning here.
Nice to
Thank
see you again kahit ganito
Yeah.
lang. No?
Yeah, virtually we
Oo
see each
nga,
other.
oo.
That's good.
Okay, so we also have another comment here from Loy Vincent Deriada. He said, ang kapayapaan na hindi hinihingi, ngunit ginagawa at isinasagawa. Nakasalalay ito sa pangkalahatang gawi, higit lalo na ang pananaw ng namumuno tungo sa mamamayan. Magandang araw po, ang ganda ng discussion. Okay,
Oh,
thank you very
ang
much.
lalim din nila, ano? Oy, tanong kayo, lalo na in line with psychology. Bakit ganito, no? Bakit may mga conflict talaga siya? Sige.
Okay, so I think that they should just reserve their questions later. Baka they were still thinking of questions to ask. So Mom Margie can answer your questions after the second speaker. So you just write your questions on the chat box or Facebook comments. So I believe that we are now ready to listen to our next speaker. Our second speaker is quite an accomplished person and a retired professor of Mindanao State University, General Santos City. She holds a bachelor degree in English and a bachelor's degree in political science at Holy Name University, Tagbilaran, a master's degree in anthropology at Suleiman University, and completed her academic requirements of a postgraduate degree in anthropology at the University of Hawaii. She was an Asian Public Intellectual Senior Fellow of the Nippon Foundation Japan in 2008, an executive education grantee of the Institute of Politics, Kennedy School of Government, Harvard University in 2009. She was awarded a short fellowship at the Salzburg Global Seminar in Austria in 2008, and a visiting research fellow at the Center for Southeast Asian Studies in 2007. She also participated in a master's class and workshop on dealing with the past and transitional justice in Bern, Switzerland in 2016. She was a visiting scholar at the College of Intercultural Communication in Japan in 2018 and presented a paper on gender and violent extremism at Philippine Studies Conference at Hiroshima University in 2018. She also presented different researches to different parts of the US, Europe, and Asia. And one of them was in 2019, where she presented a paper on the politics of belonging, inclusive peace and security among the grassroots communities in Muslim Mindanao to the 10th Euroseas Conference at the University of Berlin. She was also a writer of different national and local publications and has written numerous articles on topics related to armed conflicts and peace processes on transitional justice. She has done a variety of consultancy works with international agencies supporting BARM. And her groundbreaking works on the interface of illicit drugs, armed conflicts, and politics in Maguindanao and Lanao del Sur is a chapter in the book Out of the Shadows, Violence and the Real Economy in Mindanao, which has been given the National Book Award in the Social Sciences by the National Textbook Development Board in 2017. So ladies and gentlemen, help me welcome Professor Rufa Guiam. Hi, Ma'am Rufa. Nakamute po kayo. Your mic is on mute.
Hello.
Hello, I can hear you now, Ma'am Rufa.
Okay. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh to everyone. How many participants do we have? We have a lot. Thank you to all of you for having me today. I already committed to Jobar that I will find time for this input, but I told him that I'm going to be talking from the perspective of transitional justice framework. So can you see my screen, by the way? Hello?
Yes, ma'am, we can see your screen.
Okay. So if you notice, I was assigned conflict resolution, but I told Jobar it's and even Bobet that it's impossible to be isolating conflict resolution from an entire range of process from peacemaking to peace building. And to do that, I want to do it using the perspective of transitional justice. So thank you very much once again. So I'll proceed. If you look at your screen, I'm presenting to you the framework that we are using in transitional justice. Maybe before that, just to give us an orientation of what, on a general view, transitional justice is like crossing a bridge. It is, like all Filipinos, maybe those younger than I am, and some of you may not have experienced how hard it was to live under martial law. But maybe you have already experienced vicariously different violent conflicts in Mindanao, especially the Marawi siege, for example. So where transitional justice is looking at a journey of peace from a dark and violent past to a shaky present and towards a much brighter and peaceful future. I'm saying that we still have a shaky present. Margie has detailed how elusive peace is still, despite the fact that many people are already oriented to the culture of peace, but we still have a shaky present owing to many factors. And I cannot think of a better metaphor than this bridge, which is a bridge in my home province in Bohol. It's made of bamboo slats, but underneath there are steel braces to allow for heavy load or a lot of people to cross it. But I like the imagery because the front part is quite dark, and if you look at the other side, it's bright, and that signifies that there's a lot of things we do in order to cross the bridge, because it's not easy crossing that shaky bridge. And there are also possibilities that we are going to fall from the bridge and get we either drown or we either get bitten by whatever monsters there are out there. So it's a metaphorical depiction of the kind of dangers we still are facing. And the 2022 elections are coming next year. And already we are seeing a lot of political action which might lead to violence if all the personalities that Margie has enumerated and described will be at the forefront of our electoral contest next year. So in other words, we have to brace for all these challenges. So to go back to the framework, this framework, if you notice, it's circular because it's understood that you can start anywhere and there's no ending to all the processes that you need to do in order to accomplish these different pillars. We call this the 4 pillars of transitional justice, which is based on a Swiss federal government framework of dealing with the past. Some people like to start with the right to know, because if we want to address conflict in a peaceful way, we want to know what happened in the past. There are many sayings that you must have heard about, the most recent one was President Duterte's comment to Heidelin Diaz after Diaz won the gold medal for the first time after 92 years. Sabi ni President Digong, let bygones be bygones. You remember that the father of Heidelin and Heidelin herself were included in the list that Salvador Panelo came up as a part of a conspiracy to oust the president, and even the father was accused of being an NPA. So of course, this was a hurting blow to Heidelin, who has been giving honors to the country as a silver medalist in the Rio de Janeiro Olympics in 2016. So, but Digong just says, you forget the past. In the dealing with the past framework, we should not forget the past. Hello. There's some disturbance in the audio. Okay. So that's why in the right to know, we need to do some fact finding about what happened. And that's the reason why the Marawi siege is still a problem right now, because there has been no truth commission organized to investigate it. It is important to know what happened in the past because we want to know who would be held accountable for the violence that was created or that was inflicted on so many people. After knowing who to be held accountable, we need to have access to justice. Now, justice, we have the normal court justice that we have in the Philippines, but there are cases when the regular courts are not able to do the dispensation of justice. So this can be done by a mix of what they call alternative mechanisms, including international courts like the International Court of Justice, for example, and that is being invoked right now with the possible filing of cases against the president for extrajudicial killings. I think you have read a lot about it. Then you have, if the right of justice demands that there is reparation, part of accomplishing justice is to provide reparation to those who have been aggrieved by the action of the state. So for example, reparation can come in many forms. In the Marawi siege, there is a bill pending in Congress to compensate the people who have been victims of the siege. However, that has a serious problem facing it because there is no truth commission yet. There has to be a fact-finding mission to be undertaken, an objective fact-finding mission that would provide for a mechanism how to divide the compensation amount, if there will be, if the bill becomes a law. Because you cannot just distribute the money for reparation equally, because not all people suffered in the same way. So there has to be a mechanism for um, determining who gets what and how much will anybody get. And there is the concept of restoration, meaning putting back the infrastructure that was lost during the conflict. And there is what we call the easiest reparation can be what we call symbolic, like a simple public apology from whoever sits as the president for the violence or whatever grievances that have happened to a certain group of people can also be taken as a form of reparation, a symbolic one. Another would be to put up markers on sites that have been the location of gruesome murders of so many people. Like, for example, 2 years ago, we went to Palimbang to celebrate the 45th anniversary of the Palimbang massacre, or actually the Malisbong massacre. And one of the actions for reparation was to put up a marker to identify that place was where so many thousands of Bangsamoro people were killed during the time of martial law. We went there, and the mosque where the massacre happened is still standing there with all the bullet holes riddled in throughout the whole building, and they have not repaired it for purposes of making it as a marker, as a reminder of that gruesome event more than 45 years ago. Of course, the most important part of the transitional justice framework is the guarantee that past violence or past atrocities, especially the massive ones, should not be recurring in the future, in the present or in the future. And the reason why, from this perspective, violence continues to occur is because there are no reforms undertaken in order to guarantee that security forces will not be abusive of their authority, in order to guarantee that there are very strict governance and security sector reforms to make police officers be conscious of the respect for human rights and human life, and to respect these conventions of war if it is a war situation, which means that people will not just be killed summarily just because they are accused of something, but you know very well that it is happening even at the present. For example, just recently in Polomolok, several killings have been done, and the accused security forces are the local police. So a group has already counted more than 80 people being killed summarily without any investigation. One of them is our former colleague, the late Ustads Abdul Ghaffur, Taha Abdul Ghaffur. So we really were sad that he was killed in broad daylight at 3:00 p.m. here in Jensan on his way home. So, and then up to now, there has been he was killed a year ago, but until now, there has been no explanation who and why he was killed. So we go, first of all, I think we all agree, many of you have already taken courses on peace education, so that a lot of you already are familiar with that expression that peace is more than just the absence of war. So it's more of an enabling environment where people, especially our authorities, will respect the standards of justice. As of now, kasi, a lot of people think that justice is only for those who have money because they are the ones who can afford to file a case in court. But for poor people, especially among our indigenous peoples groups and all the other disadvantaged and marginalized people who would be killed summarily without any explanation, it's very impossible for them to access justice simply because there's so much money involved in accessing it. And as Margie has brilliantly explained earlier, some people are poor not because they are lazy or they are not willing to work hard for money, but it's because there is not just enough money to to spend other than for food or basic necessities. Now, peace is, unfortunately, a lot of people think of peace as a destination. It's not. It is a journey. Even if you reach that bright future ahead of you, as envisioned in the bridge that I used in the beginning of my talk, it's not a destination. You don't stop there. And I think it resonates very well with the comment earlier that peace is something to be worked on, worked at. It's not something that you like to achieve and then you get it and you get satisfied. There's no peace if there's no real peace as envisioned by Harris and Morrison if we don't realize that it's a journey of 1,000 miles. It must be taken one step at a time, according to former US President Lyndon B. Johnson. And it's a journey fraught with so many unpredictable events and phenomena, so many like a typical telenovela. I know some of you are very fond of K-drama. I know Luz is one. I shared that with her. Anyway, this journey is fraught with a lot of twists and turns. There are many roadblocks and pockmarks along the way. So there are so many black swans, meaning things that just happen at you don't you sometimes you don't predict it, but they happen anyway. So so I'd like to bring you to the spiral of peace building. A lot of people interchange the use of peacemaking, peacekeeping, and peace building. The three terms are quite different. They are all part of a journey or a process. We start with what we call negative peace on one end and positive peace on the other. And a lot of people will ask, bakit merong negative, may positive peace? There is peace when, for example, even at home between couples, when people are not talking to each other, it's peaceful, right? But that peace does not mean the real peace. It could be peace that can be broken at any time when someone provides a trigger for any argument or dispute. So no peace and there is no war, meaning that while there is no conflict, there are internal conflicts that are still to be solved, to be resolved, and to be transformed to something more positive. So think of this phase as the phase that happens when there is the height of conflict and so many people have died, and you need to have an external agent to sound off to both warring parties to just keep the gun silent for the time being. So it's like, like when a couple is fighting and somebody else, either the in-laws or somebody close to the couple will say, can you please stop for a while and let's talk about what is making you fight each other, because it might lead to violence, it might lead to harm, bodily harm for each party. So we start with that when an external agent comes to mediate and tell the two parties, wait a minute, you just stay on two sides and be silent for a while, and let's make the peace. However, we cannot stay at that stage. We need to move on to the second phase, which is after you order the cessation of armed conflict, meaning you mediate in order to have a ceasefire between the two conflicting parties. There should be temporary negotiations and temporary accords. For example, the accord to sign a ceasefire, so it has to be covered by an agreement. In the first lecture this morning, Margie was talking about more of a conflict from a personal perspective. I'm talking about conflict, as you can already guess from the beginning of my talk, about these communal conflicts or vertical and horizontal conflicts in society. So there should be, in the case of vertical conflicts, meaning a state authority versus a rebel group. For example, in the case of the Bangsamoro peace process, we start with negotiations for the first round of peace talks between the Moro National Liberation Front, MNLF, and now for the Moro Islamic Liberation Front. The MNLF peace process ended in 1990 during the time of President Ramos, when what they call the final peace agreement. And as you know, it was not a final peace agreement because another peace process was initiated right after the signing of that agreement. I've written about it as an assessment. I said even before the ink dried in that agreement, there was fighting going on afterwards. And this was between the Moro Islamic Liberation Front and the Philippine government. Kasi you all know that MNLF excluded the MILF in the negotiation. So you see how exclusion is another factor for violence. When some people are excluded in a process, especially in a very crucial process like the peace process, then they're going to instigate violence again. Now, with this phase in peacemaking, there are initial confidence building measures. One of them is the provision of relief and humanitarian assistance, or some short-term socioeconomic development programs like a 3-month, like backyard gardening, or as I have experienced doing work with MNLF communities under the UNDP program, multi-donor program before, starting in 1996 up to early 2000. We provided short-term socioeconomic development projects like cattle fattening, goat racing, things like that. And then also I remembered how I led a lot of rice distribution activities in the whole of, not only in the mainland where the MNLF claimed influence, but also in the islands. So ito'y ginagawa during the peacemaking phase. However, after making the peace, you need to ensure that that peace will be kept by both sides. And that is why in the case of the MILF, they agreed to organize what they call the Joint Coordinating Committee for the Cessation of Hostilities, or JCCCH. Mahirap i-pronounce ang acronym kasi mahaba. But it's a Joint Coordinating Committee in order to ensure that both parties do not violate the terms of the agreement signed or the accord signed in the ceasefire. So, and there is an international group that will come to monitor them. So we used to have a third-party monitoring group, TPMT, composed of civil society organizations. But more importantly, we had an international monitoring team, which until now is still serving as the monitoring team to make sure that what agreements both the MILF and the government has signed, despite the fact that the MILF leaders have become the new government in the BAM now, the IMT is still there. So in other words, we're still trying to keep the peace, even if we already have substantial strides already achieved under the peace, the final peace agreement called the Comprehensive Agreement on the Bangsamoro. So this phase of the peacekeeping, aside from monitoring whether the parties in the agreement have violated their side of the bargain in the agreement, it also sets the stage for making political leaders, especially in the rebel group, to be trained for political mainstreaming. And that is why if you have heard of the United Bangsamoro Justice Party, UBJP of the MLF, that's part of that political mainstreaming so that they will be ready to participate in democratic elections in the coming years. So it also creates informal processes for people to participate in local governance. And that is what happened in many LGUs in the ARM before, like Muslimin Sema becoming the mayor, used to be MNLF Central Committee Executive Secretary, and he became mayor. And we had the one in Jikiri in Holo, who also became mayor as a result of the capacity building done during the peacekeeping phase. But we don't stop there. We want to go through a higher level, which is the peace building stage, which aims at sustaining the peace and prevention of recurrence of armed conflict. So what it means is that those who are working for the agreement, namely international donors, civil society organizations, even the academe, although I'm sorry to say that the academe has been a little bit so uninvolved in the past peace processes. So this phase continues the different confidence building measures through the convergence of development efforts. So you will notice, for example, part of this is the creation of a Bangsamoro Normalization Trust Fund, which is now being managed by the World Bank. It's an agreement to put together all the money from international donors in order to ensure that the normalization process will push through despite the lack of capacities and the lack of funds. So it's putting up a trust fund from different donor countries, and the World Bank is managing it. It might start its full operations by next month, in fact, in middle of August. So the peace building phase promotes and strengthens structures that support the peace. In other words, it creates the enabling environment so that peace will thrive. So what it means is you need to install very important and very stringent institutional and political reforms so that armed conflict will not recur. For example, as in the framework of transitional justice, this is the guarantee, the fourth pillar, the guarantee of non-recurrence of conflict, meaning that governments must ensure that there are meaningful, relevant, and appropriate structural reforms in governance and security sector so that we will not have the same recurrence of massive violence and massive atrocities that were done in the past. One of these activities is already the 1987 Constitution. If you can remember that the 1987 Constitution was formulated after the end of martial law, when we had a new government led by the late President Corazon Aquino. And that was one of the provisions in that constitution, was to ensure that no president will be re-elected. So a president will only sit for one term. That's already one of the provisions that ensures that there will be no leader who will resort to long-term authoritarian rule like what happened to Marcos. And there will be peace constituency building involving all sectors of society, where you promote peace education and promotion of culture of peace. And that is why you are having this training right now, because you are all to be the purveyors of lessons for our young people, to make them always opt for the culture of peace rather than the culture of war. So the aim of peace building will be to have a society which is free from injustice, although maybe that could be a utopian dream still at the moment, to have people who are not suffering from massive hunger and poverty. Still a dream right now, especially with COVID, because a lot of daily wage earners can no longer move freely to earn their daily keep. So that's really a huge challenge, despite the fact that there are claims of government to reform. And I can see some reforms in the military, for example. From my military friends, they have told me they have created human rights desk within the AFP, and that's something to be celebrating. Although, of course, you don't know whether it is on paper or this is really being practiced, but they have also a peace and development desk. So, and in the OPAP, there is the Office of the Presidential Advisor on the Peace Process now. There is already a desk for transitional justice, and I am working closely with them to give trainings on transitional justice to AFP. And the only lacking training that has happened because of the COVID also is the training of police officers for TJ. We haven't done that yet, but that's in the works. I am in communication with the one sitting as the TJ desk head in OPAP. So that's the process of peace building. So it represents a way to achieve reconciliation. So it's more than just resolution of conflict. Kasi when you say a conflict is resolved, it doesn't mean that it will stay resolved for the rest of the time. It might recur in the future, and that is why you need to have a more substantive, a more encompassing process like peace building. So it includes all the reforms of all agencies and institutions, and government must be able to perform that as the one who is holding the authority and holding also the power to be able to make reforms happen. But if we have leaders who are not particular about these reforms, then we have a very serious problem. And we need to think about that when we go to the polls next year, when we elect both our national and regional and local officials. So peace building is also based on these principles, that it is people-centered, it's always participatory. When we say participatory, it doesn't only mean representation, meaning numbers of people who are there. It means inclusion. It means that their voices and agency are factored in many decision making that governments make. It's not just a token representation. For example, our structure in the local government says that there is a representative of NGO or CSO in the local special bodies even at the municipal level. That's true. But how is it practiced is very much a token one, meaning there's only one person representing civil society there. So naturally, in any decision making, that voice will be suppressed by the dominating voices of the political leaders in the local government unit. Thirdly, the principle is that it's based on confidence building. Therefore, relationship is very important here. And this is a problem with many of our external donor agencies who come in to offer help or assistance in many aspects of human life or social life, because they think that it's enough to bring the money and the technical expertise. People want to see a good relationship between donors and partners. Now we don't call our partners beneficiaries because it assumes that the local people cannot do anything. They are helpless, they are powerless, they are poor, and therefore they need to be assisted. That is no longer the thinking of many communities and many partner agencies. They think that they should be part of the planning process, even at the beginning of, or even at the conceptualization of a project. For them, they should already be on board. And that's the major mistake that many donor agencies have made so far. I've been in so many donor programs. I've been shouting that every time I'm engaged, and every time it's violated, I distance myself from that group so that I don't want to be accused of, like imposing donor agencies wants over local people's needs. So in terms of the overall peace building scheme, we have these 5 different processes. And if you notice, conflict resolution is only a part of it. So I'm going to show that in a form of a diagram where we start with the beginning. It's like, it's called a peace building map using the imagery of a mountain. The mountain representing a hurdle to go through. If you notice, let me make sure I will have a wider. Okay, let's start, because it's much better to appreciate it from this. You start with the something that is natural, which is the world is composed of different people. The reality of the world is diversity rather than uniformity, right? Because if we were made uniform, it will be a boring world. And God, in His infinite mercy, has created a world that's so diverse, so colorful, and that's what makes the world a very exciting place to live in. We have differences. In fact, even twin sisters, and Margie and all psychologists know that twin sisters or twin brothers have differences despite the fact that they look similar. So it's a natural thing to have conflicts, to have disputes, born out of the differences in orientation, differences in the ways of working, differences in the way we look at things. But we don't stop there. It's a hurdle, but it's a hurdle that needs to have what we call conflict prevention. And what do we need to prevent conflict? We need peace education, we need mutual understanding, we need tolerance, and the respect for other people, basic respect, coexistence. I remember at one lecture I gave, and I gave it to a group of predominantly male religious leaders among the Bangsamoro. And I talked about the inclusion of marginalized groups in society. And I asked them, among the groups that are existing in your communities, who are the least included, meaning they are disregarded or many times ignored. I was surprised to find out that a group of hijabis, and some of them were wearing not only hijabs, but niqabs, the entire face veil, which covers everything except the eyes. And they came up with, I was so amused because they came up with collage showing that among the groups of people that are excluded in society are the LGBT community. And nobody dared to talk about that in that forum because it was, the participants were basically religious leaders. And I was even also a little bit uncomfortable how to explain that. But the woman who presented their output was very careful in saying that we have to accept that at present we have the existence of these types of people who have chosen different gender identities. So what do we do? Should we kill them? We are not supposed to kill them. We know that they exist, so we have to tolerate and respect them. And of course, there was one male participant who said, "Ma'am, what is your stand about that?" I said, "My stand is everyone is a person worthy of respect and dignity and integrity. And therefore, you have no right to be judging them because of the kind of choices they have made." So what I mean to say there is that we need to have basic respect for everyone so that we are able to live mutually in harmony, in social cohesion. So we try to prevent, we know that there are differences owing to our diversity as peoples, but we need to look at structures, how to provide a platform for understanding these differences, that differences do not hamper us to be developed as a people, but they become well springs of development because we can see a lot of innovation created by these diverse peoples in our midst. So we have to respect and recognize them. Oops. I'm trying to, what's wrong with my computer? Okay. Okay. So we don't stop there. It's still a long hurdle ahead of us. Conflict prevention is just one huge stride to go up that mountain, because the disputes sometimes cannot be prevented and it will create a problem. And the problem can lead to violence. And at this stage, we need to have certain tools for managing the violence so that we will not be incurring a lot of damage. For example, we try to prevent that instead of affecting thousands of people, we might lessen or mitigate the effects of the violence. So we need to have negotiation skills. We need to have a long course on how to do mediation and dialogue, which is not which is impossible for us to do in this short lecture. So skills negotiation. How do you try to talk to those who have the firearms? Because it's different. I was interviewing a military officer one time, and he told me, you know, Rufa, if people are not talking anymore, guns will do the talking. So you try to prevent that to happen. So we need to develop skills of mediation, because if we don't talk anymore, there's a permanent barrier to communication. It will be something else that will do the talking, and it will be more destructive to society. There will be more victims. There will be more collateral damage. Sometimes the violence can lead to full-scale war. And for this, we need already special skills. And this is where we need to come up with an internationally mediated peace process. And that's what we had with MNLF and with MILF. So we need to have, because war is just like a disaster, we need to have these skills. So we need to have some other people outside the country to mediate for us, to help facilitate the signing of peace accords. And this is where we try to slow down the effects of war by, if you remember, the peacemaking phase and the peacekeeping phase, to make the two parties in a war agree to a ceasefire and to have several accords to ensure that that ceasefire stays despite the fact that there are still unresolved problems. So there will be reconstruction and rehabilitation. As I said earlier, reconstruction is putting up the schools. For example, in the Mama Masapano massacre, after about 6 months, a school was constructed in that specific barangay where it happened. A rehabilitation would mean that there would be not only reconstruction of houses and social infrastructure, but also rehabilitation in terms of providing scholarship grants to the orphans of war, providing basic social services like health, and especially now in the time of COVID, this is very much needed. So all these will need skills in peacekeeping, as I have said, and also lobbying for more donor funds to support the peacekeeping phase, to support reconstruction and rehabilitation, because this costs a lot. And in the case of the Philippine government, which does not have enough, so much resources in doing this, we need to have skills of lobbying for more donor funds to do this. So under this phase, we need to have conceptualized a development framework or a roadmap, how we want society to be in the aftermath of war. But to do this, we need to have the framework of conflict transformation. What it means is for the government to undertake a reparations program, to have institutional reforms created, and to go back to the normal or the natural way of living together in diverse communities, to have cooperation, which is also natural, and eventually we aim for a society which is sustainable. We aim for a society where you put in place mechanisms for ensuring not only national security, but all the more importantly, human security, which means security, food security, security of abode, security that you will have a stable job. And all these are being challenged right now under COVID. And the development program should be inclusive and appropriate and respectful of local skills and knowledge, not something else. So eventually, the whole aim is that society will have justice, will have peace. And this is the peace that is not the graveyard type of peace. This is the peace which is not based on might is right principle. This is the peace based on the recognition of the integrity of diversity of peoples, and that everyone has a right at a table. Everyone has a right to speak his mind about what he wants society to be and how society should be uh, designed in a way so that it will respect all diverse peoples in all parts of the country. So that's how I look at peace building using that framework. And we have heard Margie earlier that there are 4 basic areas of conflict transformation. We start with the personal. Is you by yourself have a lot of, Margie has described this, the running argument between your ego and your, what's the other self that you have. Your heart and your mind might be contradicting each other. So in Islam, it is said that jihad is more powerful when it is the jihad that you have to conquer your own demons. The jihad ul nafs, meaning to conquer your weaknesses and tendencies to be tempted, to overcome all these worldly desires, is the greatest jihad, greater than the jihad that is popularly perceived as a holy war. So personal, you can't help it. Like you have the tendency to be carried away by your personal desires. But if you don't think about the consequences, if you don't exercise this way of thinking where you think of consequences short term and long term before you do anything, then it's going to be a crucial decision that you make, because it can make or unmake your future. So the second, of course, is the relational that we need to resolve. And this means always working on the relationship. Like I'm saying that for those of you who are married, you know that a couple will not stay. I mean, I don't think there is a single couple in the world who has not gone through some disputes, or like discussing their problems with each other. But it's one thing to have those, and it's another thing to recognize that it's part of the fact, as I showed in the peace building map, that you have diverse interests, both of you. There are many commonalities that you have, but there are also differences. So how are you going to work it out? You are not perfect. I am not perfect. Your husband is or wife is not perfect. So are you. So what do? You should be fighting all the time because you are not perfect. No, it has to be done in a way that you try to look at more of the common things, so that you agree to some things and maybe you agree to disagree with other things. But how you resolve your relational conflict is very much important in considering your relationship with others. It's a working, you cannot just leave relationships on their own. You have to work it out. You have to work at it all the time, every day. A lot of people ask me, I've been married for 39 years. How do I keep my relationship at home last? It's a way of, as I said, it's dealing with commonalities and differences, and accepting some things that are different with your spouse, that you have to accept that after all you have lived with him for that length of time. And because relationships are really things that you need to work on rather than you just leave it. You have to nurture relationships. The cultural sources of or areas of conflict transformation, of course, this has been invoked, religious tolerance, because it is popularly perceived that the reason for Mindanao conflict is religion, which is not. So, but tolerance for other religious views should be a basic requirement for forging peace. The idea of coexistence, I said, mutual respect. But the most difficult area for conflict transformation, and I think this was also highlighted by Margie's presentation, is all these structural causes of violence, poverty, unemployment, vulnerability to diseases, especially with the pandemic right now. Of course, corruption in government, the higher level of illiteracy that we have in Mindanao compared to the national average, the many cases of injustice which until now have remained unsolved, economic marginalization, and the marginalization of groups which are not factored in governance and other critical decision-making processes in government. And of course, the non-participation of the poor in political exercises. Meron na ba kayong nakitang janitor na nagiging kandidato ng pagkamayor? Wala pa. So many of those political positions are still dominated by the elite in society. Okay. In my long work with peace building, starting from the time when I participated in a program called Duyug Ramadan in the late 1970s. You see, I've been in this business for more than 4 decades. I've seen how many people have suffered a lot. I remember also that I was asked to write about healing and reconciliation in divided societies. And in the research that I did as a basis for writing the article for conciliation resources, these were some of the things that my informants told me. The societies that we have now are divided because of the long exposure to armed conflict. And there was one who told me, how can we move on when conflicts continue to occur? And this is a challenge to the guarantee of non-recurrence. We are often confronted with being vulnerable to displacement. And in fact, I will share with you later on as a possible material for your case study in the future. There were some people who also told us, how can we move on when the lives of our relatives who were tortured and massacred cannot be restored, even if we get paid in terms of reparation, their lives will no longer be restored. One also said, our trauma is not a headache that can be cured with a pain reliever. That's true. I mean, of course, you know very well, many of you are psychologists, you know that trauma healing will take more than just a simple, even the most powerful pain reliever, even the illegal ones like fentanyl cannot do it. Okay, some examples of cases of reconciliation after years of violent conflict have happened in other parts of the world. For example, there was a truth and reconciliation in South Africa. And it's very interesting. In Johannesburg, there is a museum called the Apartheid Museum. Apartheid is from the Dutch word apart and hide, meaning to set apart and to hide those they want to hide. So in that Apartheid Museum, they recreated the mechanism of apartheid that the South African government, through their Dutch colonial masters, implemented in those years of apartheid. And it's very, for me, it was eye-opening experience because I went there together with Attorney Raisa Jajuri, now the Minister of Social Welfare in the BAM, and we were made to simulate how people of color, meaning the blacks, who happened to be the natives of South Africa, were treated during those times of the Dutch colonial supremacy. In fact, it was even at the entrance, I was already tearing up because we were made to put our names in a raffle, and whatever it resulted through a computer generated process, we enter into separate doors, and I entered in the door of the whites, and Attorney Raisa entered in the door of the blacks. That was how they were treated during that time of the Dutch colonial supremacy. And we cannot see each other when we enter the museum. We cannot see each other except towards the end when there was they put up towards the end of the tour. There is the Truth and Reconciliation Commission of South Africa video presentations where the blacks who were offended and the whites who were representatives of the Dutch colonial government had a hearing, series of hearing. And all these made us really tear up because it presented some kind of a catharsis of the pain that the blacks have felt during the time that they were isolated in their own country. But it has happened. There was a reparations commission, and there was, and as a result of all these processes, South Africa now is considered a rainbow government. They now, starting with Nelson Mandela, who became the first Black president of South Africa. This ironic because South Africa is composed of blacks. I mean, the indigenous peoples are blacks, but the officials from the colonial Dutch and the new South Africans, the Afrikaners, are whites. There is another symbolic reparation. If you remember what I said about reparation as being symbolic, at the time in 1989, former Chancellor Willy Brandt of Germany went to Poland for a state visit. So aside from providing financial assistance, economic process, aside from providing providing the socioeconomic development assistance package to Poland, Chancellor Brandt surprised everyone in his team because he asked to pass by the tomb of the Polish victims of the Warsaw Uprising in 1970, where it was the German army that massacred a lot of them. So, so you see, this is one of symbolic reparation. It doesn't cost much, but it cost a lot of humility on the part of the local leader. Willy Brandt was not part of the party that ordered the massacre, but he represented the German government at the time. So he thought of it as appropriate to do that as a symbol of reconciliation and healing for Poland, for the constituencies in Poland. So I'm giving you an example of the listening process we conducted with the women of Marawi after the Marawi siege. I'm using this as an example that it's really powerful to install a conflict transformation framework and start with listening, knowing what happened from the victims themselves. Many Maranao women felt that they can still be dignified when their voices are heard, they don't want to be insulted by, because you see there's a high level of pride among the Maranas for being self-reliant for a long time. But the Marawi siege destroyed all of that. Another voice is that we recorded was one woman said, "Never in our life did we dream of this. Our ancestors never did as well. We have lost so much. I spent years building my home. We did not ask them to bomb us. We can line up for relief." You see, this just shows to you how proud they are of their past, that they have been prosperous and stable economically for a long time until the Marawi siege happened. So in closing, one of the women said, "Marawi will always be home to many of us. Even if until now the homes are not allowed to be put up, even the gunshots have dissipated and the land no longer shakes with the explosions, we will heal its wounds. We will come home." It is a recognition of their willingness to heal their wounds by coming home, if only the government will allow them. So thank you very much for listening, and I hope I kept up with my time. So shukran to everyone. Walaikum assalam to everyone.
Wow.
Thank you so much to our very articulate speaker, Professor Rufa Guiam, for that very comprehensive discussion on conflict resolution and on the concept of transitional justice as a tool to resolve conflict, or at least help to reduce inequality and injustices in the communities by boosting the capacity and skills of the citizens. And I also like what she said, that what makes the world interesting is our differences and diversity. And of course, conflict is a natural thing. It makes the world less boring. But of course, we also need to learn inner control, tolerance, and of course, the basic respect for everyone. So just like what she said, we need to talk or learn to mediate, because if people will not talk, then according to her, guns will talk, and that's dangerous. So we'll now move on to the question and answer portion for our speakers this morning. So if you have questions, I think nobody has raised their question yet on the chat box, but if you have questions there, you can also turn on your microphone or raise your hand to raise your questions. So before that, I would like to read also some of the comments here from the participants. Thank you, Margie, for the enlightening talk. And from Ma'am Rama, from this topic of peace, transformation, and conflict resolution, I just remember a speaker in the person of Mr. Amr Kair Abdullah. And we have also one question here from Luz Dose for Dr. Margie. Could you suggest how to create a more peaceful environment inside the classroom for teachers to achieve happy students?
A peaceful environment, I believe, and it is mirrored by a peaceful teacher. Diba? If the teacher gets inside the room with a smile, um, greeting students with a smile, begins the class with a smile, then I'm pretty sure that at the end of the class session, the classroom will be in a peaceful environment. And of course, you have to be tolerant of your students, sabihin natin mga inadequacies. Kasi at times when we get inside the classroom so inspired, no? Sabihin natin stress-free, when a student is asked and cannot answer question, naku, sabihin niyo, wag niyo naman ako ipa-stress. Ang ganda-ganda ng mood ko. Tapos ngayon, stress niyo ako, hindi kayo nakastudy. So, we started now to nag. No? So, hindi na peaceful environment. So, again, control your emotion, hold your emotions. And, yun na nga, know yourself kung kailan kayo dapat, kung kailan, yung throw, no, your anger in the right time. Because, anger is an indicator that you are a reactive person. No. Gusto niyo yung sabihin you are emotionally responsible and a reactive person if you succumb to your anger. So a peaceful classroom environment is manifested by a peaceful person, a teacher in the classroom. Yun lang.
Okay, thank you very much, Ma'am Margie, for that very practical answer to
Yes.
Mom's question. Okay, so any more questions from the
Hello.
participants?
Hello, can I also add?
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, I've been teaching peace and conflict studies in the sociology department before I retired. And one of the approaches I used was not to make the subject a content-oriented subject, but a skills, like behavioral change kind of thing. So instead of well, of course, there were quizzes, but the quizzes were always practical, and the exams where students were asked to draw conflict trees and things like that, and I used a lot of visual aids, make students draw, exercise their artistic and creative skills through drawing. Of course, it needs a lot of preparation on the part of the teacher, right? But I enjoyed it also as much as my students did. There were no dull moments in the classroom because they were busy drawing, creating images. In fact, if I am on a face-to-face training with you, I will not start with just a lecture. I'll start with a drawing exercise. I will make you draw first, but because it's not, it's impossible to do it effectively in a virtual lecture. So that's how I deal with, and also, right, Margie was right. If you appear to be less intimidating when you enter the classroom, then you will already start the mood to permeate in your classroom, right? Also, because I've been a teacher for more than 4 decades of my life, just before I retired, I've been teaching since, you can imagine, some of you were not yet born, 1971. I've been teaching since that time. So I've taught from high school, college to graduate level. And the most enjoyable group I taught was the high school, because high school students are more fun to be with. You become more dynamic with them because it demands so much of your energy to be talking and teaching high school. But I also like the college as well. The graduate is more, like you have to be a higher level of abstraction. So it needs more, like people will become very formal and things like that. But during my first few years of teaching, there were some, when this was in Notre Dame University, and the first class that was given to me for English 1, I used to teach English. One of my majors was also English, was the engineering class, which is notorious for being mischievous, naughty, very rowdy, very they were all doing things, many things, like flying paper planes. I think you can relate to this, flying paper planes, running around. They were first year college students, and yet they were behaving like high school. They just went out of high school and became like high school students in a university. So So my approach, instead of getting angry with them, was when I came in, I told them, oh, because at that time I was in my early 20s. I was just 20 years old. I started teaching when I was 19. So when I was in NDU, I was still very, very young. So when I came to the class, and some of these are already professionals now. They are already directors of, one is a provincial engineer already in Maguindanao. But can you imagine when I entered, because I was also my playful self, I said, oh wow, look at that airplane. Can I join? So I joined the whole thing. And after a while, everyone said, Mom, can we start our class? So you see, that's one approach you can do. I mean, you cannot say stop, because they will not stop. Because they will tend to do the opposite of what you tell them. So what you do is to, like to behave in the same way that they can relate to. And later on they realize, because I always tell them, okay, we can keep on playing until the end of the period. I don't care. I get paid even if I play with you all the time. I don't deliver any lesson. And so they realized that it was a mistake not to be playing the whole 1 hour of their class. So they said, Ma'am Rufa, can we start having our lesson now? So I said, okay, good. So, and ever since that time, they became my friends. And I don't have even to do anything. They will just allow me to, to lead them in discussion. And participation is really very important, because I noticed that when students don't get involved, so I don't stay in one part of the classroom. I go around, so people are always moving their head just to see me. So that's also another way of making students not sleepy, or like sustaining their interest throughout the period. And so I'm happy that one of my students posted one time and said, you remember how we had our classes? It was like a seminar every day that we had classes with her. So I'm really thankful that all of these have somehow rubbed on my students, because they really enjoy having that kind of classroom, rather than, like the lecture type, when the teacher just sits in the middle of the classroom with an authoritative manner, and people telling people, oh, I am the teacher here, you are the student. Marami ka pang bigas kakainin bago ka maging teacher katulad ko. So, obey ka sa akin. Ganon. Like, I also heard of one student complaining to me of another teacher telling her na, hoy, i-pretend mo lang na tama ako kasi ako ang teacher, ikaw ay mali kasi estudyante ka. So, all those things, you can relate to this, Margie, right? So, there are experiences like that. So we avoid all those things, and we ensure that students will be really dying to see you again in the next session of your class, because they will enjoy it rather than stay bored listening to concepts that are on top of their heads.
Yeah.
Thank you. Sorry for my interruption.
Thank you very much, Ma'am Rufa, for that very precious experience, na sharing your experience to us. And
So yeah, additional, so we can see really from Ma'am Rufa no na nagre-reminisce si Ma'am no ng kanyang mga happy moments with during her teaching times. Maybe in addition, you feel the students, okay? Just feel the students, especially for teachers like us. Na don't let them feel that there is gap, no generation gap between you and the students, kasi alam naman natin generation X kami at sila mga millennials, mga Gen Z pa siguro. So don't let the class feel that there is indeed a gap, no? Tama sabi ni Ma'am na, teacher ako, ganito kayo, no? So remember, iba-iba yung orientation natin at ang orientation nila ngayon. Now, if kung kaya lang man din, at their age at times, No, at their
Oo
age of
nga eh, maka-rejuvenate yung magturo eh. So, that
oo.
explains that. Do you know I'm already 70 years old right now? So,
Wow.
yeah, so it's a milestone for me to reach this age. But
Yes,
I
ma'am.
think contributing to that, reaching that stage is because I've been a teacher for 5 decades. So,
Yes.
I mean, the teaching has really enriched me in more ways than one. I mean, I'm 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 more grateful to my students rather than the students are grateful to me, because they have opened my eyes to more tolerance and more understanding of people's behavior in other, because I'm also teaching right now, but in other ways, like I'm teaching adult kind of learning when I train participants in a conference or things like that. So it's like that. It can make you young. I mean, teaching. That's why of all the professions I've been engaged in, I've been also a journalist in as editor, first woman editor of Mindanao Cross for 5 years. But teaching is always the profession I go back to with pleasure all the time. Thank you.
Okay, so there's one more question here, for Ma'am Rufa. This is from Jed Utano. Salam, Ma'am Rufa. Thank you so much for the wonderful information. I just wish to know how to transitional justice, I think, TJ,
How to?
how to TJ, or I think this is transitional just,
Is it in the chat?
yes, ma'am, from Facebook.
Uh,
Okay. And
uh,
then Mindanao histories and studies, especially in discussing or sharing with the younger generation the various conflict episodes that transpired in the region, with
okay.
greater consideration, of course, of not reinforcing biases again, reopening of wounds, and potential drivers for another
Okay.
cycle of violence.
To know how to. Okay. I'm seeing it now. I think how to do transitional justice. Yeah, I mean, this time is not enough for discussing TJ. No, what I'm giving you is just an overview. There's a lot of activities that we can do for transitional justice, and in fact, our trainings for TJ will last for more than 3 days. I mean, just to learn the nuts and bolts of doing it on different levels, different audiences. Um, there's an advanced course that I took, and it took us 2 weeks to master, 2 weeks. And these are all done by people who are experts in transitional justice in other parts of the world. Yes, there is a caveat that I always warning that I always impart to my audiences, that when we do transitional justice, we need to ensure that there will be no recurrence of the same kind of prejudices that spawned the atrocities that have happened in the past. So it's very hard to be teaching it to younger generations who have not experienced the horrors of being in conflict, or not having even the vicarious experience of their parents escaping from conflict, for example, being caught in the crossfire between the two conflicting sides, and there's violence in it. For me, it's very real, because even if I was not born in a place of conflict, my life as a married woman, I've been in Mindanao for more than 4 decades already, because I've been teaching in Mindanao all of my life. And I've seen how that violence has affected a lot of people. In my own family of affinity, the relatives of my husband, I have had, I mean, all of them have experienced more than 20 times of evacuating to safe places because of the intermittent armed conflict. And so I see it as a real experience on my part, because I've seen it also when a group of armed men barge into our house late in the evening to extort money from us. So that's how, I mean, the pain of that experience. still lives on until now. But what I'm saying is, because of these experiences, I am more able to share how it should be done in a proper way uh, without generating a new round of prejudices against other people who have caused the pain. Because, like, I'd like to go back to the experience of my seeing a video of a white African victim of a Black African violence incident in Johannesburg, when almost 10 people were massacred in a church, in a Christian church in Johannesburg, and the perpetrators were young Black Africans who wanted to get revenge for the killings the whites have done in their communities. Can you imagine hearing a congregational prayer and being fired at? And so the hearing after more than 4 decades of that war came, and the survivor of that victim, the wife of the victim, said, "I should be angry at you." She pointed to the perpetrator, who was now a grown man. "I should be angry at you, and I am angry at you, but I cannot hate you because I know what my people have done to your people." This was a supreme act of reconciliation, and I could only cry seeing that, because I haven't heard that from any conflict context here in the Philippines. The only time I heard that was when there was a short recognition of the Palimbang massacre. It was a documentary film done by Commission on Human Rights, and where Eta Rosales was still the commissioner for CHR. And there was a uniformed officer, a military, who said, "I'm now crying because of your experience. In behalf of my officers, I want to say sorry for what they have done to your ancestors. But of course, the bigger impact would have been if the commander-in-chief of the Philippine Armed Forces will say the apology, but it never happened. So, but it happened in South Africa, and so I think it will still become a reality in the future, but maybe not now. But that in itself is a really good way of looking at a transitional justice kind of thing. We cannot, well, we know that they are your enemies, but many times the enemies, the perpetrators, were pushed to do it because of a certain guidance from another person. So many times we have to recognize that kind of situation that has affected them. So you cannot really, you hate the action, but not the person. I think you need to do that. Thank you.
Okay, so there's one more question, Ma'am Rufa. I really liked your diagram on peacemaking, peace building, and the last part 3. Ma'am, in your analysis, our situation in Mindanao, were we able to reach the part 3?
And that is why it is a spiral. It is a spiral because if you diagram it as a straight line, it doesn't work, because we are having peace building at the moment, but we know that in other parts of Mindanao there is peacemaking there is peace to be made, especially with the Lumad, with the indigenous peoples who continue to be victimized by atrocities of the armed forces. There is peacekeeping to be made because there are violations of ceasefire agreements. So in other words, it is a spiral because it tends to go back. It tends to lapse to the first phase. And in fact, we can have all the 3 phases in the whole of Mindanao taking place at the same time. Because, for example, we are now in the MILF GPH peace process. They are no longer fighting. They are no longer negotiating. They are now in the what they call the peace implementing stage. So that means they will put in mechanisms to ensure that there will be sustainability of the peace, genuine peace. And part of it is the installation of the mechanism called a National Transitional Justice and Reconciliation Board. However, that has to be done. There is a bill pending in Congress, which up to now has been relegated to the sidelines, largely because of COVID, and also because there is a wide apathy towards addressing violence on a long-term basis. Because you see, transitional justice, even if the term is transitional, can pave the way towards sustainable peace in the future. But nobody is quite interested on it, but about infrastructure, about, you see, all the bills. If you look at you make a survey of the bills in Congress, all those things that talk about sustainability are not there, are not being prioritized. And I'm already thinking that maybe because if we put an end to violence, there will be no use for armed forces. There will be no use for guns and other weapons of violence. So nobody will be profiting from gun selling anymore. Nobody will be profiting from the merchants of violence will no longer be what's it, productive anymore because they cannot sell violence anymore. Nobody will be manufacturing the technology, as Margie has said, technologies of violence like bombs and landmines. Nobody will be producing them anymore because nobody will be buying them anymore. Instead, we should be buying more disinfectants and things like that. The COVID has also generated a new industry, right? So
Okay.
that's it.
Okay,
Yeah.
okay, ma'am. So we have another question. I guess this is for both speakers. I'd like to hear, this is from Sir Bobet. I'd like to hear from you some practical ways of reducing negative stereotypes and prejudicial attitudes to prevent conflict for us, peace ed teachers, to take to heart. Thank you. So we'd like to hear first
Margie,
from
Margie can start.
yes.
Okay, good. Prejudices. I would like to take the scenario in class. For me, I think the teacher is the best example, no, in ano ito, paano ano itong prejudices. First is the teacher herself or himself should be free, no, from the biases. Okay? So that when he or she heard somebody in class, kasi it's normal, lalo na dito sa atin, di ba, yung mga estudyante natin, mga coming from the diverse culture. So still, personally, I have noticed that there's still some students who are of these prejudices against some groups, no, against one another or against the other. Now, if you notice that ipaprocess na kaagad sila. So again, you cannot give what you do not have. So ikaw as a teacher, dapat free also from the biases, free also from the prejudices. Then, maybe in the course of the lesson, yun na, no? Doon mo na i-inject kung paano. And another is, pag talagang na-pinpoint mo na at na-identify mo na yung individuals na medyo may nakikitaan mo ng mga prejudices, no, against the other, pwede mo siyang ipatawag talaga personally. Then there, you process. Oo. Kasi dyan ang challenge sa atin ng mga teachers kasi eh. So we have to live by example. Ipakita rin talaga natin na tayo mismo in class, wala rin tayong prejudices against this particular group, this particular tribe. Yun lang. So very practical lang din.
Okay.
Yes, ma'am.
I'll add to that. A concrete example is after the Ampatuan massacre of 2009, the apelyido ng Ampatuan was, derided. A lot of people when you are you have a family name like Ampatuan, people will say, "Oh my God, you're part of that killing family," you know. So in my classes, merong mga Ampatuan na apelido. So when I do the roll call or anything, I read the first names rather than the second names, because I wanted to, but that has been my style since I started teaching, because sometimes I know that there are apelidos that are being tagged as this and that. So to refrain from incurring that, my strategy is to call each student by their first names, even if they're already in college. So that's one way. Another is when there is a sexist remark or a misogynistic remark I hear from my student, like denigrating women or things like that, I call them out every time and explain, just like what Margie says, to process it in a way that can be understood from the point of view. And that means that in your inputs, you also include gender sensitivity type of lecture, where you look at roles as very dynamic, like gender roles as very dynamic, that they're not stuck into a box like males can do this and females can only do this. There is no stepping out of the box to do other things, because the reality is whatever the situation calls for, that calls for a certain kind of role to play. And it doesn't have to be always arranged in a binary male and female stereotypical role. And in fact, even in my work in development, because I've been a development consultant for a long time after I retired, I call out even government officials. I have that, they always tell me I'm very matapang, kasi kahit na secretary ni president, I can call him out if he makes that remark. One time I had a meeting with international donor agencies representatives. So it was an international meeting, and I was representing the civil society organizations, and somebody, a very he's no longer in government now because he resigned, but he used to be very expressing a lot of misogynistic remarks and sexist remarks, like, I'm my name is this, but you can call me anytime. If you are sexy and pretty, you can call me anytime. I had to step and give him a comment. I said, "Sir, you better start stopping what you are doing if you don't want to get." And I said it in the meeting, and the UNICEF representative called me aside, and I was fearful. Afterwards, I was realizing, oh my God, what did I do? but I got a very positive comment from the UNICEF representative. She said, "Oh, Rufa, you are the only person who can do that, because we as the international donors, we cannot do it for fear of violating our diplomatic ties with the country. But you can really do it, and thank you very much for doing it." And
Kaya nga idol kita, ma'am eh.
Huh?
Kaya nga idol kita eh.
There was one time also, this was an conference among IP leaders, and the participants were asked to report by teams, pairs to report on their outputs. And one pair was a male and a female IP leader team from the Dulangan Manobo tribe. And then it was the guy who was presenting orally, and the lady was providing him the visuals, and she was using the Manila paper that they were drawing their outputs on. And he said, "Oh, sana maganda yung aking partner para maganda rin ang presentation ko." Immediately after that, I had to call him and said, sana maganda at sexy ang partner ko para maganda rin at sexy ang presentation namin. I said, teka muna, sandali lang po. Hindi po kailangan sexy ang tao para makabigay ng sexy na presentation. Tapos nagsagot po talaga siya, bakit ma'am hindi pwede magamit ang word ng sexy dito? Sabi ko, wala, pero hindi ito ang context na panggamitan ng word na yan. So then later on, I called him and asked sorry for what I did to him in public. But I told him that you should not be saying that because nakakahiya. Wala kang respeto sa partner mo. Kaibigan mo pa naman yun. Tapos insultuhin mo dahil dapat sana sexy ang... So hindi siya sexy. Hindi siya maganda. So insulting yan para sa isang babae tapos sabihin mo sa public. Wala na lang ganun na, pwede bang magdiretso ka na lang sa presentation mo? Huwag lang yung comment doon sa... So sabi niya, so one of the leaders told me, Ma'am Rufa, that goes to show that we really need a very good gender sensitivity training sa aming mga IP leaders. IP leaders ay tinuringan pero mga ano pa rin, mga sexist, misogynist, mga ano pa, may tendency pa na to look at women as a sex object. So, so dapat ganon. Ganon yung, minsan hindi tayo maging matapang kasi, ako lang siguro dahil matanda na ako, I don't care what happens to me. Matanda na ako eh. So I can say anything I want to say. Of course, I observe proper decorum most of the time, but when things like that happen, I can't let it slide. Sorry na lang. I want to really assert na no one has the right to denigrate any group of people for the kind of choices they make. They have to be respected. Kasi sa kanila yun. Wala tayong pakialam doon. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much, Ma'am Rufa, Guiam, and Ma'am Margie Fiesta. Truly, your wisdom is really helpful and enlightening. And as much as we want to take one more questions, I think we're afraid we don't have enough time to take one more question. So I hope the answers to your questions, the participants who raise your questions, satisfies your queries. So again, thank you very much from the bottom of our hearts.
Thank you.
Okay, so
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Ma'am
Ma'am.
Rufa, Ma'am Marge.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Welcome. Thank you too.
Parang bumalik ako sa dating environment. Except
Classroom
na,
environment.
except na virtual.
Okay. So indeed, peace is really encompassing. No? The principle we have heard and learned in this webinar is not only applicable and be taught in classes, but also very beneficial and applicable to our daily lives, to our families, and anywhere and any organization we are part of. So to show our appreciation and gratitude to our two equally brilliant speakers this morning, let me read the content of the certificates. Certificate of appreciation is given to Dr. Margie D. Fiesta for sharing her valuable time and expertise as a guest speaker on the topic, Understanding Conflict, Peace, and Violence in Webinar 3 of FPE101 Virtual Teachers Training for MSU System on July 31, 2021. This three-part webinar series will provide competency training for faculty members from the 11 MSU campuses to augment the Peace Educators roster. Signed, Edron C. Manla, PhD, Project Manager, Peace Education Project. Signed, Pulen Anderson, Assistant Cultural Affairs Officer, U.S. Embassy in the Philippines. And the same citation is given to Professor Rufa C. Guiam. So again, to our two brilliant speakers, thank you very much.
You're welcome and thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you very much, ma'am. Okay, so before we end this session, we would like to express our gratitude to everyone who untiringly participated almost every week to attend this webinar, for their commitments to be here and be part of this peace education. The professors from the different MSU system and campuses, of course, the equally competent speakers since day one, the unrelenting support of the U.S. Embassy Manila through Sir Neil Pacamalan, who was also never absent too since day one. And of course, to Dr. Adrienne Manla and her team who continuously and persistently pursue and continue this program, despite the difficulty of times and threat of the pandemic. For peace and for Mindanao. Again, thank you so much, everyone. And of course, before we go, we'll have a photo op first. So kindly turn on your cameras for the photo op. And reminders, your certificates will just be emailed to you, so be sure to answer the evaluation form posted. So, are you ready for the photo op? Okay.
All right. Sige, 1, 2, 3, 1.